Hello and welcome to this computer literacy training. My name is Tendayi from Foundation for Business Technology. I've been working with computers virtually all my working life, and this year 2020 marks exactly 30 years since I started working in the computer industry on the 1st of January 1990. So if I were a pilot, I could definitely tell you that you are safe in my hands during this training. My main objective is to give you a basic understanding of the computer and the way that it functions. I need you to be comfortable working with a computer, knowing that it's a tool just like your kitchen utensils. So the same way you are comfortable working with your knives and spoons in the kitchen, that's how you are going to be comfortable working with the computer once we are done with this course. We are going to look at the components of a computer as well as the programs that run on the computer. To begin with, we are going to define what a computer is. A technical definition of a computer would be an electronic device for storing and processing data according to instructions. But a more general definition would be any device that can accept input, process it, produce output or results, and optionally store data or information. So the best example of a computer is yourself, because on a daily basis you receive information, you receive data that you process in your mind, in your brain. So every action that you take is actually a result of information that you have processed. Every decision that you make is a result of information that you received either through hearing, or you have seen the information, or you actually felt it through your skin. Then you think and you process and you make a decision after that. There are two main parts to a computer. There is the hardware and there is the software. The hardware are the physical components of the computer, and the software, those are the non-physical, the information handling parts of a computer. So for those of us who are spiritual, we would say the hardware is like the body, and the software is the spirit that resides inside the body. So just like this body without a spirit is dead, in the same way, hardware without software is also dead. It's just a pile of plastic and metal. But the moment there is software that is functional, then the computer comes to life. That is why when we press that on button on the computer, suddenly something that seemed to be dead and useless comes to life, and you can actually do something with it. The computer is made up of different discrete elements that we call devices. Each device is actually an independent item on its own. You could actually say it's an independent machine on its own, but they work together to form this computer. From the definition of the computer that we gave above, we can see that the computer must be able to receive input or information. It must be able to process that input to come up with results or output, and then it must also be able to store that information. It means that the computer needs to have separate parts or components that can perform these different tasks. So we call these separate components devices. The devices are separate units, each of which can actually be bought separately. and it performs a separate, distinct function. So the devices are classified into 5 main categories. You have got input devices. These are the devices that allow the user to enter data or information into the computer. So there are different ways in which we can feed information into the computer. The most obvious would be your keyboard. So when you type something on your keyboard, the keyboard is an input device because it is feeding information into the computer. Then you also have your mouse, which you use for giving instructions to the computer. So when you are clicking, when you are highlighting something on the computer, you are actually giving input, giving instructions, giving orders to the computer. Another popular input device is the scanner. The scanner is used for transforming images on paper into electronic images on the computer. Then you also have a related device, which is the barcode reader. All of us have been in a shop or supermarket. When we get to the till, a barcode reader is used for scanning the barcode, which represents the item code or the part number of the item that you are purchasing. So it is an input device because it reads the code for the item and puts it in the computer. We also have other input devices like a microphone, for example, a camera. You can play your guitar into the computer. Then you have industrial input devices like sensors. So in industries throughout the world, there are sensors that are used for sensing. It can be temperature, it can be sensing pressure, it can be sensing motion, and then that information is fed into a computer, which then processes, and machines function the way they are supposed to function. So that is input devices. Then the computer needs a processor, which is the processing device. So the processing device is the brain of the computer. So it's like when you receive information, you have to think on it, or you have to calculate the information. If I simply say to you, what is 3 plus 4? So the words that you hear from me, those are the input. And you hear through your input devices, which are your ears. But your mind is the one that does the calculation and gives you the answer of what is 3 plus 4. So in the same way, the computer also has the processing part, the one that takes the instructions, that takes the information. When you say to the computer, underline something, or when you say to it, make it bigger, make it bold, the processor is the one that is busy executing all those instructions. Then you have output devices. So the output devices enable the computer to show us the results of the processing. So a typical example of an output device would be the screen that you are looking at when you are typing. So the moment you press some keys on the keyboard, immediately the computer gives out that letter or that number or that symbol that you've typed, and it shows it on the screen. So that information is being output from the processor. Other output devices besides the screen or the video display unit, abbreviated VDU, is the printer, because we can print information onto paper. Most of the reports that we require are delivered on paper, so we need a printer to produce that output from the computer. And then you also have other output devices like plotters. I'm sure you have seen very large documents. For example, the plan for buildings. They are so big that you cannot fit them in an ordinary printer. So we use plotters for printing those huge documents. Then you also have output devices like your projectors, like your speakers. They bring out sound and they bring out light and pictures from the computer. So whenever you look at a computer and you see devices on the computer, you ask yourself, what is the purpose of this device? Is it to input information into the computer? Is this device producing something from the computer? So that is the way you determine whether something is an input device or is an output device. Then we have devices that we refer to as storage devices. So the storage devices are there to enable us to keep the information that we have collected or the information that has been processed. It has to be kept somewhere. It has to be saved somewhere. So the primary storage on a computer would be your hard drive or your hard disk. That is the one that gives you permanent storage on the computer. You also have other alternative storage, like for example your flash drives. You have got your CDs and DVDs. These days we have got what we call solid state drives or solid state disks. So these are drives that are actually made of computer circuits, not actual physical disks like the traditional hard drives. You also have magnetic tapes that are used for storage of information on computers. So depending on the industry that you are working in, the type of storage can vary so much. Others even use optical discs for storing information. Then you also have memory in the computer. So the memory in the computer is used for temporary storage of information while you are processing. So that type of memory is referred to as random access memory or RAM. It is because it is only active while you are actually working on the document. That is why for your desktop computer, or if your laptop doesn't have a battery and it's only relying on electricity, if you are working on your document and you don't save it, if the power goes off, you also lose your document. The reason is because that document that you are seeing on the screen, it is being kept temporarily inside the random access memory. So you can think of random access memory as your scratch pad that you are using temporarily before you decide what to finally write down permanently. We will also be looking at other types of memory shortly once we finish discussing the last type of device, which is the communication device. Communication devices enable computers to connect to each other so that they can share information. Because of these communication devices, computers in a single office or in a single building can be connected together in what we call a local area network. But we are also able to connect the network in one building to a network in another building or even in another town, and we now call that a wide area network. So that is now possible because of network devices like modems, like switches, like routers. They enable us to interconnect computers that are close together as well as computers that are at very large distances. That is why you can go on the internet and you go on Google, you search for information about the Queen of England, and the computer in a few seconds brings you information that is stored in a computer in the heart of London. Why? Because all these computers have been interconnected using these networking devices, which have provided a very wide area network, allowing people from all over the world to share information. I mentioned memory earlier on. The memory primarily is used for remembering the instructions and the information that you are working on. It works exactly the same way that your brain or your memory also works. Imagine if I were to say to you, what is 2 plus 5 plus 3 minus 1? The first thing that comes to you is, do I remember even the numbers that have been given to me? So the very first thing that you need to be able to do before you can even work out the answer is to remember the question itself. Then you also need to remember the information which is inside the question. So that's exactly the function of memory in the computer, especially the random access memory. When you give an instruction to the computer must store that instruction so that it remembers the instruction until the job is done. Because those instructions stored in a program can be many, and the instruction can say for the next 1 hour you are supposed to do A, B, C, D. So the computer must remember that instruction for the next 1 hour. So that is the purpose of memory. Then you have got what is referred to as read-only memory, or ROM. So the purpose of the read-only memory is used for storing the information or programs that come with the computer. In other words, the manufacturers of the computers, they'll put certain information in memory, which is usually referred to as BIOS, or basic input-output system. I'm sure you have noticed when you are starting a computer that it will do some memory test. It will tell you what processor there is. It will tell you what memory there is on the computer. It can even tell you the manufacturer of the computer, the manufacturer of the processor. So all that information is being kept in what we are referring to as the basic input-output system. Then we also have another type of memory which we refer to as firmware. Firmware can be referred to as programs that are permanently stored or programmed into a read-only memory. So because the actual memory itself is a physical device and the program is a software, so the combination of the physical device and the software is now the one that is referred to as a firmware, a hybrid of hardware and software. So the firmware basically keeps information about the configuration of the computer. It means that for the computer to function, it has to know what kind of hard drive it has. It has to know what kind of keyboard is connected to it. It must know what type of memory there is. So the firmware provides the information that coordinates all the different parts of the computer. Because remember, the computer itself, the hardware, is just dead matter, dead material. So it needs some intelligence that tells it that there is a keyboard somewhere, that there is a hard drive somewhere, there is a printer port somewhere, there's a memory somewhere. So that configuration information is the one that is stored inside the firmware. So from time to time, you discover that one of your devices will stop working. So when the device stops working, it starts telling you it cannot recognize the hard drive, or the computer cannot recognize the keyboard. The computer cannot recognize this and that part. Why? Because it has malfunctioned, and the firmware, that configuration information, no longer recognizes that part of the computer. Okay, so let's take a short break, and then when we come back in the next module, we are now going to look at software, the different types of software.